Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us late in the day on a Friday. I'm Amy Seawright, Senior Advisor and Director of the Southeast Asia Program here at CSIS, and it's my honor to welcome you all here for the CSIS Pertamina Banyan Tree Leadership Forum with Carlos Sonny Dominguez, the Secretary of Finance of the Republic of the Philippines. Today's event is hosted by the CSIS Southeast Asia Program and the U.S. Philippines Strategic Initiative, and is made possible with the support of Pertamina. And I also want to thank Henry Howard for some generous support as well to make this event possible. We're very pleased that the Finance Secretary could make time in his extremely busy schedule this week during the annual meetings of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Before I invite Secretary Dominguez to take the stage to deliver his remarks, I need to make one safety announcement, which is I am the safety officer for this event, and in the unlikely event of an emergency, I will direct you along with other CSIS staff to the exits. We will exit the building and gather across the street, but that won't happen, so we're fine. But let me go ahead and introduce Secretary Sonny Dominguez. Secretary Dominguez was appointed Finance Secretary in July 2016. He previously served as the fundraising and finance manager of President Duterte's election campaign and oversaw the Economic Agenda Subcommittee of Duterte's transition team. Secretary Dominguez has over 40 years of experience in the public and private sectors, having most notably served as the president of the Philippine Associated Smelting and Refining Corporation from 1992 to 2002, and chief executive of Philippine Airlines from 1993 to 1995. He was also a cabinet secretary under President Corazon Aquino, serving as Secretary of Agriculture from 1987 to 1989, and Minister of Natural Resources from 1986 to 1987. So with that, please join me in welcoming Secretary Dominguez.
Thank you for this. I have a bad ankle. Thank you, Dr. Seawright, Secretary Cayetano, who also is known as Senator Alan Cayetano, my friends from the U.S.-Philippine Society, thanks for coming here. Ladies and gentlemen, I must begin by thanking the Center for Strategic International Studies for organizing this forum on current developments in the Philippines. This is an opportunity for us to present a better rounded picture of where our country is and where we intend to go. The Philippine economy is delivering the performance we anticipated, notwithstanding the political noise and the significant terrorist event in Mindanao. We have become an engine of growth for our part of the world. For the second quarter of this year, our GDP grew by 6.5%. We expect even faster growth for the second half of the year. This performance is well on track in meeting the full year target growth rate of 6.5% to 7.5%. Significantly, economic expansion was led by industry at 7.3% and agriculture at 6.3%. This is a departure from the earlier pattern where growth was led by the services sector. The higher growth rate we have achieved is due to several factors. Remittances from our foreign-based workers now account for about 1/10 of our GDP. That sustained inflow keeps consumption demand high. We are also expecting more investments coming in as we modernize our infrastructure and reform our economic policies to spur business activity. Investment-led growth will make our domestic economy more inclusive, create quality jobs for our people. This will help bring down poverty incidence. Our entire economic strategy seeks to bring down poverty incidence from the current 21% to 14% by 2022. The present government is pushing an ambitious infrastructure program that will increase roads, modernize ports and airports, and provide more mass transit for our cities. Called the Build, Build, Build program, we are seeking to match the infra investments of our neighbors, such as Thailand and Singapore. Investments in infra have higher multiplier effects, and our construction program will have an expansionary effect on the economy. By the second quarter of the year, the government spending accelerated to 7.1% year-on-year. This indicates greater absorptive capacity and a political resolve to get things done. Sorry. The Philippines is looking to spend about $20 billion a year through the medium term to build urgently needed infrastructure. This escalated spending will be funded by means of official development assistance packages, as well as by expanded revenues expected from the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program. The tax package will align our tax rates and policies with the rest of the region. We are hopeful the Philippine Congress will pass this reform package into law very soon. The reform enjoys support of the business community, professional economists, and a large number of private groups wishing to see a simpler and more efficient tax system. We aim to achieve a tax effort closer to the regional norm of 15% of GDP. With the increased revenue from both administrative and tax policy reforms, we aim to keep our deficit to 3% of GDP. That will allow us to grow our economy more rapidly without inviting a spike in inflation. The fiscal discipline we maintained over the past few years enabled our country to achieve investment-grade credit ratings. Those credit ratings enable us to borrow at significantly lower rates. We intend to continue deserving those ratings. The Philippines benefits as well from a benign interest rate environment. That environment encouraged a property development boom as well as increased business activity. Over the coming years, we expect that benign interest environment to persist. The benign interest rate environment enabled us to work down our public debt to a more manageable level. This produced a virtuous cycle. The lighter debt load won us better credit ratings, and that in turn helped us keep interest rates low. Notwithstanding increased spending for the infra program and expanded social services, we are forecasting inflation rate at between 2% and 4% through the medium term. As I said, we are limiting public sector deficit to 3% of GDP. As a matter of policy, we are maintaining an 80% to 20% ratio in borrowing, favoring meeting our financing needs through domestic borrowing. This will lessen the exchange risks as we pursue an expansionary economic strategy. Over the past few years, our GDP grew faster than our debt accumulation. Prudence dictates that we strive to maintain this trend. Fiscal stability is our key to sustainability of our economic expansion. We are further modernizing our capital markets to enable consolidation of capital support for our long-term growth. We have significantly moved up the global rankings for the ease of doing business. We intend to build on these gains by working harder at reducing red tape, curtailing corrupt practices, and limiting our negative list for investments. We have every interest in simplifying procedures for business. New investments and more business activities are what will liberate our people from poverty. One of the least mentioned advantages of the Philippines is that we have a young and very talented workforce. This is an asset in a region with aging workforces. Over the next few years, we expect to hit a demographic sweet spot. The large number of young people entering the workforce is, at the same time, a challenge for the economy. We must expand quickly enough and draw larger volumes of investment to create the jobs the new entrants of the workforce expect. We are investing heavily in training young Filipinos to be more competitive in a global economy. We understand that this young workforce will be our economy's comparative advantage long into the future. That young and talented workforce produces complementarities with other economies in our region. If we fail in achieving our economic targets, we will have a disillusioned young generation. If we succeed, the younger profile of our workforce will be a tremendous asset considering the rapidly aging population of the advanced economies in our region. The largest fiscal space we now enjoy will mean nothing if we do not improve our bureaucracy's capacity to efficiently execute policy. In the past, absorptive capacity was a problem. It is less so now, with a more efficient, less corrupt, and highly motivated bureaucracy. The more efficient bureaucracy will improve the ease of doing business in our country. We understand there is still much work to be done in this area. We will relentlessly pursue both administrative reforms across the board and reform of policies restrictive to business initiatives. We appreciate the support extended by the U.S. government intending to help modernize our governance, improve policy formulation across the board, and strengthen the rule of law in our country. The support likewise covers winning peace and progress for Mindanao, facilitating trade and modernizing our agriculture. With the generous help of development assistance from the U.S., we have accomplished much. We hope improvements in our governance and benevolent conjuncture of factors favoring stronger growth will encourage private investments from the U.S. to take a much closer look at our economic prospects. In closing, let me say that the partnership between the U.S. and the Philippines can only grow stronger in the coming period. This is a partnership tested by time and made more enduring by the shared values that we hold. We can only promise to work harder to achieve peaceful and prosperous nation for our people. We are confident that with the support of our friends, great things will be achieved in the next few years. We are optimistic and we are committed. We are confident we have the right strategy and we are moving in the right direction. We will continue to rely on your support in this grand effort to reduce poverty, build strong institutions, and properly care for the most vulnerable among our people. Thank you and good day. Where should I go?
Would you like to sit here?
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Secretary Dominguez, for that very nice presentation. Let me start the conversation with a couple of questions. You've been traveling a lot recently to discuss infrastructure projects with Japan, China, the United States. And I wonder if you could share with us a little more detail about the Duterte administration's priorities for infrastructure and the challenges that you may face in acquiring foreign financing for key infrastructure projects in the Philippines.
When we assumed office, in fact, during the even during the campaign, our president made several commitments, and that is number one, to reduce poverty, and the strategy for doing that is essentially to get into massive infrastructure projects, which we have sorely, our former governments have neglected. If we take a look at the past 50 years, the Philippines spent an average of 2.6% of GDP on infrastructure. We are planning to double that, and by the end of the term, probably increase that to 7.5% of GDP. So this is our main strategy for poverty reduction, and we think it will create good jobs for people in the outlying areas where we establish irrigation systems, where we improve our railway systems, where we improve roads and ports. Not only that, it will also allow the communities in the outlying areas to connect better to the markets and lower their costs, and actually also lower the losses that they incur right now from post-harvest losses in the transportation of the agricultural products.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Could I also ask you a little more about potential deals signed with China? President Duterte, I believe, is about a year ago, returned from a state visit to Beijing, where he signed something close to $25 billion in agreements, deals, loans with Chinese companies and banks and the Chinese government. But over the course of the past year, very few details have emerged about specific projects. So I wonder if you could share with us a little more what kind of projects are going forward, and what we should expect to see out of those kinds of agreements.
In October of last year, during the President's first state visit to China, we signed a total of about $25 billion in deals. 15 billion was signed by the private sector with the Chinese companies. Mm-hmm. The Chinese government committed a total of $9 billion for Philippine projects. 6 million of those are in ODA, and $3 billion are for commercial loans. On the ODA side, we have a total of 75 major ODA projects, which I don't have the list right now, but you can look them up in the NEDA website, neda.gov, I think, .ph. And these projects really are heavily on rail projects, basically to improve the logistics in our country. You won't believe it, but we only have 77 kilometers of railway in the Philippines now. Our goal is to have 3,000 by the end of the term. 3,000 kilometers of railway. And that is because of just neglect of the past governments. So it's going to be, so the major railway projects will be first from Clark, where we are going to establish our major international airport, to Manila, and south to Calamba or Laguna. So that will be a total of 170 kilometers. We are also planning to establish a railway between Clark and Subic, which is another 70 kilometers. And that will encourage development of Manufacturing in the Clark area. By the way, I was just told by Jaime Zobel de Ayala yesterday that we, believe it or not, we are actually manufacturing motorcycles in the Philippines and exporting them to China. We are more competitive than the Chinese in motorcycle manufacturing, particularly the 400cc and up. There will be another railway project that will start from Manila. We already have a railway from Manila to Bicol, which is around 600 kilometers. We are tearing that up because it's only, it's a narrow gauge. We're going to put in wide, what do they call it? Standard gauge railway, and that will be also started. There will be also a railway project in Mindanao. We hope to circle Mindanao with a rail system, but we will start from a town called Digos, Davao, and go up to north to Tagum, Davao. That will be about 120 kilometers. But eventually that will encircle the Philippines. We are also going a lot into improving the roads outside of Metro Manila, irrigation up north in the Cagayan Valley, irrigation in the ARM area, the autonomous region for Muslim Mindanao. That's a very large project in Mindanao. So essentially, that's give you a flavor of the types of projects we are going through. But look them up in our website.
I recently toured the manufacturing area around Clark Air Base and was really impressed with all the foreign investment in the manufacturing facilities there. Can you just do you expect the ground to be broken soon on some of these rail projects, and are they high-speed rail or regular?
I don't think we can handle high-speed rail. We don't have a lot of experience in rail, rails, as I mentioned. I think, however, what we will consider high speed is probably 100 kilometers an hour. I think that will be the top speed that we will allow. But right now, that's good enough for us. Well, no, Amtrak goes a little faster. I take the Amtrak from Portland to visit my aunt in Tacoma. It's about the same as driving, 2.5 hours to 3 hours.
You shared with us quite a few impressive statistics about the investment climate, ease of doing business. We are aware, however, of some American businesses, and I would imagine some other foreign investors that are a little bit cautious right now about investment in the Philippines because of some of their concerns around the extrajudicial killings on the war on drugs. But I wonder if you could speak to that, if that has been an issue for you. And then more broadly, from your perspective, what kind of risks are you concerned about in the financial space? There's a lot of uncertainty right now in global politics and the Trump administration's economic policies and other things, but from the Philippine perspective, are there particular risks or uncertainties that you are watching closely?
Let me start first by addressing your first question. Some companies, of course, are always hesitant, but let me tell you, our stock market has gone up 27% from the low period in the last week of December of 2016. So 27% up to now in pesos. Okay, in dollar terms, because we we depreciated our peso a little bit. It's up 23%. I think the U.S. stock market in the same period went up 9%. So that speaks to how confident people are in the Philippines. One of our senators recently was complaining that the direct foreign investments have gone down, but he has not captured the entire data. And reinvestments by foreign companies in the Philippines have actually been quite healthy. Recently, we had a infusion of $2.3 billion in investment in two companies in the Philippines. One, Japan Tobacco, invested $1 billion in the tobacco industry, and two, Macquarie and the Sovereign Fund of Singapore invested $1.3 billion in the power industry. You were talking about risks. In the beginning of let's put it this way. Since 2008, the Fed has ballooned its balance sheet, right? And we were concerned about the reversal of the process. But what was announced by the Fed is a very mild reversal. So we're not as concerned anymore in the financial area. The it's more stable. But of course, everybody's watching closely as to who the next Fed chairman is going to be. If I may say so, we're very happy with Yellen. Okay, but I'm not supposed to say things like that. But her policy seems to be very reasonable, very rational. It doesn't seem to. I don't think it will create instability. Of course, there are a lot of risks. It's not really a risk. We know for sure that interest rates are going to go up. It cannot be this low for this long. It's very unusual that the interest rates have been low for the last 10 years. And we think it's going to go up, but I think the increase will be mild. It will be very manageable. So those are the risks that we take, and we think that the other risk, of course, is a jump in price in oil, but I don't think that's in the books, at least not in the near future, with a lot of oil production coming from the U.S. I'm not supposed to be so bullish, but frankly, I don't see too many dark clouds in the horizon.
Okay, let me open up for questions from the floor. Could I ask you to wait for the microphone and right here, Andrika, introduce yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, Amy. Hank Hendrickson with the U.S. Philippine
Henry.
Society. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Question is about federalism and plans by the Duterte administration to go forward with some form of federalism, and whether you see any kind of economic dividend from moves toward federalism in the Philippines. Thank you.
The way I look at it is, if we do a full-blown federal state, it's going to be I would put it mildly, a fiscal nightmare. Okay. However, there are as many federal systems as there are federal states. My suggestion to the Commission to study federalism is basically to address the really two serious issues we have on federalism. And that is the ARM issue, the autonomous region for Muslim Mindanao. In the first place, I don't think you can have one autonomous region for Muslim Mindanao. The Islamic community in the Philippines is really not homogeneous. They are really three separate cultures, and their culture is stronger than the religion. So I think it's important to have at least two, one for the mainland of Mindanao and one for the islands. Their issues are totally different. The Sulu area actually really wants a real autonomy because in the first place, they were really never under the Spaniards. They only became part of the Philippines when the American troops and Pershing went there. But the issues of the indigenous people who happen to be of the Islamic religion in the mainland are issues that have to do with resource allocation, with land issues, with land tenure issues, and they're totally different from the guys on the islands. So I think that is what has to be addressed. The other parts of the Philippines, I don't think there is a strong demand for a federal state. I think what they need is a better autonomous, more autonomy, but not necessarily federal state. Now that is what I will be talking to the guys in the commission, which will be formed by the president in the next few months. So otherwise, from the fiscal point of view, it's going to be a horrendous problem. Who's going to get what share? What powers are you going to give for taxation? Are we going to end up with a situation where one region has a rich part and a poor part, and it's really going to be quite difficult.
Yes, Marie?
I'm Ray Hebert from CSIS. Secretary Domingos, welcome to CSIS. When President Duterte took office and you became Secretary of Finance, you both emphasized quite a bit the potential in Mindanao of peace and the ultimate boost that would provide to the whole country in planning a lot of infrastructure, et cetera. And now we've had the Marawi incident, which keeps dragging on. I'm wondering how much of a drag that is on some of your plans for economic growth and development.
Well, obviously, the terrorist incident in Marawi is really not good for anybody. However, there are two things that you should remember or observe. Number one is that it is totally contained in one area. What we were concerned about is it would spread into the other cities in Mindanao, which fortunately it did not. Secondly, the political Islamic parties, the MNLF and the MILF, are actually not participating in the terrorist activity. This is purely a terrorist activity. And they are in fact helping us to contain the conflict within the Marawi area. So we are getting help from the MILF as well as the MNLF on this. So this has never happened in the past. In the past, if one Islamic group was in trouble, everybody got into the act. Now, it's very contained. The third thing you should observe is that the origin of the terrorist activity is really our war on drugs. These guys who created the disturbance or the problem were in the manufacture and distribution of drugs. When the president started throttling down their activities and they saw their cash flows diminishing, they decided to change their business model and go to the ISIS model, which is actually getting support from ISIS from abroad. But in order to qualify for that, we understand that you have to control a geographical area, which is what they wanted to control. We could have ended this probably a month ago, but there were many hostages that were taken, and that's the last thing we want to see are hostages injured or killed in this incident. So we're just wearing them down, and it's going to end soon. Economically, it has really affected only that particular area. Business goes on as usual in Mindanao. There are no disruptions in the exports of pineapples, in the flow of food, the flow of goods in Mindanao. There's no stopping or no disruption in the exports of bananas. So it hasn't really disturbed it so much, economically speaking.
Okay. Yeah, the woman.
Good afternoon, Secretary Dominguez. My name is Lindsay Lim. I'm with the World Bank. I'm a financial sector specialist. You mentioned a very aggressive or ambitious plan for the railroad system. How do we overcome the land tenure rights? How do you overcome the objections of people who might be owning the lands on which you plan to build the railroads on? Essentially,
for the two railways that I mentioned, three railways, the Clark to Subic, there are no right-of-way issues. The right-of-way issues from Clark to Manila down to the Los Baños area is already more or less cleared because there's already a railway there. The same thing with the railway to Bicol. But that's not to say there won't be guys still making the claims. Two things: the land tenure issues in the railway in Mindanao will create problems. But let me say that we have done two things. We have a law right now that says, if you have a conflict between the government and the individual, all the government has to do is deposit the money in the bank. And you can argue in court, but we can take over the land. You can argue in court about the value, but we can take over the land. So that's one of the pieces of legislation that we have. This is different from before, where they could stop you for any reason. By the way, this happened in Japan when they put up their Narita airport. I remember I used to have to go there, when they started it with guys who were dressed like Mazinger Z, and with cattle prods and everything, because they were farmers there were objecting. We will overcome it. The second thing is we have decided that we will have only one team that will deal with the right-of-way issues. In the past, the Department of Transportation had their team, the Department of DPWH had their team. We figured that the DPWH guys were better, so we said, okay, forget the DOTR guys, we will just use the DPWH guys. So hopefully that will move it faster. But we will have problems, but that shouldn't deter us from moving forward.
Yes, Ambassador. Here.
Thank you. I'm Tom Hubbard
Of course, Tom. Hi.
at McClarty Associates. Good to see you again, Mr. Secretary. When you and I first met some years ago during the Aquino administration,
Yes.
we Americans were working very hard on a development project in Mindanao in General Santos City,
Yes.
where we built port facilities,
Yes,
an airport. A lot of
Yes.
Americans spent a lot of time building a highway down there.
Yes.
Most Americans are very familiar when you talk about Clark and Subic, but
Yes.
General Santos is another place where we spend a lot of time, and I was just wondering if you could comment a bit on how viable those facilities are now and what kind of role they're playing in your development plans.
Well, I don't know if you remember, but at that time, the cabinet was organized by department, and we were also given responsibilities on a geographical basis. And I was responsible for that area. And when I found out that you were coming and Elliot Richardson was coming, I made sure I was on the same plane with him coming back. So when he got there, I said, Mr. Richardson, you've got to see this area, the General Santos area. We need an airport, we need a fish port, and we need improve the Makar port, remember? And it has worked very, very well. The assistance that was provided by the U.S. really spurred the growth in General Santos City and the surrounding areas. I focus on that particularly because number one, that is the richest fishing grounds we have, and we were having difficulty transporting the tuna from there to Japan. So the airport really helped. The airport also spurred a lot of small businesses around the area. And believe me, that is one of the, if I may say so, that is one of the best projects because of the cooperation between the U.S. and the Philippines. And I'm very proud to say that I was the one in the Philippines who led that effort. You can't, I don't know if you remember, but there were 3 political parties involved there. And the mayor was one party, the congressman was one party, and the governor was another party. So I called them all into one room and I said, look guys, I'm doing this at a political expense to me because my hometown is Davao and those guys are really ticked off at me for not putting it there. So if I hear any problem between you 3, I will take this project away from you. They behaved. There's nothing that concentrates people's minds than a threat. Than a threat of taking away their goodies. But it worked well, didn't it? No objection. Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, Henry, yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. I just wanted to further comment on the isolated nature of the Marawi incident. There are 6 hydroelectric power plants beginning in Marawi and ending in Iligan over an 18-mile stretch
correct.
of the Agus River, which produce about 50% of all electrical supplies in Mindanao, and not one of them has been affected by the commotion,
Yes.
in Marawi. I just wanted to add that to your comment. Thank you.
Well, Henry, you grew up in Cagayan de Oro, so you know that area well. Let me just comment on the Agus River system. It is a very important source of power for Mindanao, and it, however, it needs a lot of refurbishment. It has to be upgraded, and one of our major projects in the next few years is the rehabilitation of the Agus River system. First of all, it will create jobs in the area for the people in Lanao and Marawi. And secondly, this is the time to do it because we don't have a power problem in Mindanao right now. This is the time to fix it up and bring it up from, I think it's only operating at the 60% of capacity, to bring it up to 90, 100% of capacity. And we are determined to get that done.
Okay, woman here.
Thank you so very much. My name is Rita Heron Adkins. It's good to see you, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, hello.
My question relates to one of the objectives of your coming to the United States is to encourage, apparently, foreign investments in the infrastructure development in the Philippines, apparently in the context of having a more efficient drive towards economic development. My question, sir, is that a reality check is that climate change, whether we like it or not, is apparently, according to the gurus at the world and at the local levels, academic as well as political and development sectors, is that it has been recognized as a very important challenge, including to development. Now, I am aware, and we are aware, and we appreciate very much your service as the Secretary of Agriculture and Natural Resources. So I am sure that you are very much moved and challenged by this concern as it impacts precisely this objective of infrastructure development. The APEC, which will be held in the Philippines in November.
No, in Vietnam.
Yes, but apparently we'll
No,
also
ASEAN
focus
is November.
in Vietnam, and then we'll also focus on the one in the Philippines, which
ASEAN, that's ASEAN.
yeah. I'm sorry, pardon me, thank you, I stand corrected. But apparently, in that, the issue of climate change has been elevated to a top topic of discussion. Yeah. Would you be able to sort of kind of give us a more intimate projection about the impact of climate change regarding the objectives as you are promoting here in the United States? Thank you so much.
Yes. Actually, we're very aware, particularly in Mindanao, of climate change. As you know, we never had typhoons there. We had typhoons once every 70 years in Mindanao. However, we are observing with climate change that the typhoons seem to be forming further south in the Pacific Ocean, and which brings the path, which brings northern Mindanao directly in the path of the typhoons. And we've had several events in the last few years, including, it's not, well, one was a bad typhoon, and the other one was just sheer amount of rain in a very short period of time. And that caused floods in, from Bukidnon all the way to Cagayan de Oro. Remember, there was a big flood there, and Iligan as well. So we are very aware of that. In fact, I have assigned a assistant secretary in my department to focus on climate change and the risks and mitigate and help mitigate the risk. So we're working with the different ASEAN countries as well as different agencies to improve the catastrophic reinsurance, to improve the standards for construction of homes and buildings. And to work essentially with the Department of Natural Resources, the Environment and Natural Resources, Department of Agriculture, to work on mitigating the effects of climate change. That's why in the Department of Agriculture, the focus of our infrastructure there is the rehabilitation of the irrigation systems and construction of new irrigation systems for Mindanao and including northern Luzon.
Okay, we have a question here.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. John Maisto, U.S. Philippine Society. Mr. Secretary, over the years, the United States has had a robust economic assistance program with the Philippines. It spans many administrations there. Could you give us the perspective of the Duterte administration on your ongoing economic development cooperation with the United States, covering the whole gamut? I think I'm looking for the Philippine view expressed by you here in Washington as to how it's going.
Yes, in fact, I just came from a meeting with the MCC people, Mr. Nash. Is it Nash? Mr. Nash? Yeah. And as well as Undersecretary Malpas. And we focused essentially on economic cooperation between the U.S. and the Philippines. We discussed the last large program that the U.S. did in the Philippines, and it's called the First Compact of the MCC. And that had three components, okay? One was an infrastructure component, and they built a 220-kilometer road in eastern Visayas, in Samar, actually. And that area really needed that highway. It has eased the transportation of the people there. We have also had a lot of assistance with from the U.S. recently through that program to the Department of Social Welfare and of course to the Department of Finance. They assisted us in upgrading our skills in the Bureau of Customs and the Bureau of BIR. And I just told both Mr. Nash and Undersecretary Malpas that that assistance to us really bore fruit because of the help they gave us and improving our skills of the BIR and BOC in analyzing data. We were able to nail the largest tax fraud case in history. We collected $600 million recently from a cigarette company that was cheating on taxes. And I said to some extent that's due to the help of the U.S. The U.S. also had a lot of programs. I'm not sure if you remember, one was called GEM. It was a follow-on program from the assistance to General Santos, and it was really growth with equity program, and that worked very well. So we were discussing with the new administration here what the possibility of extending the Compact 2, and we wanted more infrastructure in the east coast of the Philippines, which, as you know, has very few roads and has a lot. The population is the level of poverty is quite high. So we're talking about that, talking about assistance in again through the BIR. I said that we are established I mean, those programs on tax collections are short term. But they said in the long term, I would like to establish a more professional Bureau of Internal Revenue and Bureau of Customs. And I found a law that allowed me to put up a tax academy. And so I was looking for assistance in the US to put up a tax academy. I want these guys to be like your FBI, you know. Guys, what they call the men in black who are going to collect taxes the right way, be honest, you know, and really it's a culture change that we are looking for. And we can benefit a lot from that. So we have a lot of, development assistance. When I was in the Department of Agriculture, we had a lot of work with USAID at the time. And it's really very valuable relationship. And we have used it, as you can see. It's not wasted. Your help to us is not wasted, and it's very much appreciated.
I think we have time for one more question. Gentleman here.
Thank you, Secretary. I'm Zhou Yuan from Shanghai Institute for International Studies and visiting scholar here. My question is, in the coming ASEAN summit, ASEAN Plus 3, ASEAN, even East Asian summit, and also APEC, I think there are competing regional arrangements such as the ASEP and initiated by the ASEAN and supported by China, and also the TPP-11 without the US, and also an not clear regional maybe idea from the US. So. And also, I found the Philippines has a changing attitude towards TPP. From last year, Philippines reject the TPP, but now it seems that Philippines has maybe welcome and maybe try to explore a way to use TPP. So I want to know the Philippines' perspective on the regional integration arrangement maybe in the future. Thank you.
You have two questions. The first one is on RCEP, right?
Yeah.
And regional integration. Well, we're working very hard with the ASEAN, and we're working very hard for the regional integration. We are, in fact, putting a single ASEAN window for customs and trade, trade improvement within ASEAN and also with our partners in ASEAN. So we're working again. This RCEP is something we support, but we understand there are other countries in Asia who are not too keen about it, right? Secondly, you were asking about PPP, right? When we looked at the experience of the last administration, they used PPP exclusively for infrastructure development. As a result, in 6 years, they had exactly 4 projects. 4. It seems that it takes a very long time to negotiate PPP contracts. We studied it, and we got an average of 30 months from conception to the first shovel hitting the ground. That for us is too long. In fact, there was one project that took 50 months to get going because the private sector guys were fighting among each other. And quite frankly, when they were fighting over the profits, who was going to make the profits, the public was suffering without the... So we've decided that we will initiate the projects, and we've proven that we can do it in 18 months. The first large project we're doing is the improvement of the Clark Airport to make it an international airport, and we assumed office in July of 2016. The project will actually physically begin in December of this year. So that's an 18-month project. So we've challenged the private sector and said, look, if we can do it in 18 months, show us that you can do it in that period of time or less, and we'll give you the PPP project. In the meantime, we have also made sure that, when we say we do the project, that means to say we do it on our balance sheet. We will fund it ourselves, but we bid out the project to the private sector, so they benefit from the construction side. However, we've also taken the initiative to bid out. As we are constructing the project, we also will bid out the O&M, the operations and maintenance of the project, so that the guys who eventually will win the O&M side of it run the project as soon as it's completed, actually are involved from the very beginning. So this is what we call our version of the hybrid PPP. We take the construction risk, we initiate it on our balance sheet, but we PPP out the operations and maintenance.
So you were just answering a question about public-private partnerships for infrastructure, which is very interesting. But I think the gentleman was actually asking about TPP.
Oh,
Not
TPP. Oh, sorry.
So just if you could briefly add on what the Philippines' position is on joining TPP, I think there'd be some interest in that.
No, we will not join the TPP. Without the U.S. there, I don't think it's going to be too hot. Okay? So we have decided we're not going to join it.
Okay.
With the U.S. there, we will consider. But without, doesn't make sense. We'll do something else. Sorry, I forgot.
Well, it was a good answer. So
But the
I
wrong
let you
question.
continue. Interesting.
That reminds me of when I was in college. I wrote this long paper. The professor came back with a D. She says, "This is a perfect answer, but it's not what I asked."
Well, thank you for answering so many questions that were asked and some that weren't asked, and covering so many important topics. We really appreciate your visit here on a Friday afternoon, and please join me in thanking Secretary Dominguez.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.